Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What If Doomslayer was in Highschool DxD. If you enjoy, please like, subscribe, and support the channel for more videos. The author is Wacko12.
Please support them.
Now enjoy the story. It was in the dead of night when Kuroka's magic circle appeared in front of the house. Fortunately, Tiamat and Kuroka had both set up barriers around the front yard to obscure any supernatural activities so humans would not see. And walking out the circle was Flynn, still in his blood-covered preacher suit, while nestled on top of his helmet was Kuroka. He was still carrying his combat shotgun, having just used it to deal with the last outposts of fallen angels and stray exorcists. To be honest, the Slayer was still feeling anxious. He just wanted to find this Kokobeel bastard and get this over with. But the guy was being hard to find despite having destroyed so many of his hideouts and killing tons of his grunts. Furthermore, Vega had advised against Flynn's usual tactics of rushing headfirst, as doing so might endanger the humans of the town. That was always something that held Flynn back, concern for the innocent. He sighed internally. Why couldn't Kokobeel just show himself already? All the Slayer wanted to do was tear his wings and limbs off, then rip his head and spine out. Was that too much? Tiamat must have sensed him, because she quickly came out the front door. Welcome back, Master, Tiamat said respectfully with a bow. I trust everything went well. She cast a quick glare towards Kuroka, not fully trusting the Yukai being alone with Flynn. Said Nico merely hummed as she snuggled against the Slayer's head. Flynn paid them no mind. More or less, Flynn said. Already Vega was organizing the data they had managed to acquire. What about on your end? He frowned when Tiamat shuffled nervously. Her eyes would shift between him and the house before speaking. It's better you come inside and find out for yourself. This will take a while, Tiamat answered. Flynn frowned but followed the dragon, dismissing his armor. His frown deepened when he entered the house and saw that not only Griselda was present, but so were her two students, and the local devils were there as well. All of them were gathered around in the living room, the devils on one side, and the exorcists on the other. Issei, Kaneko, Saji, Kiba, Zenobia, and Irina looked a little beaten up, while the two pawns were standing stiffly, and for some reason rubbing their butts. Rias was the first to spot Flynn, quickly bowing her head. Blazkowicz, I deeply apologize for this sudden intrusion, but what the fuck is going on here? He demanded. Meanwhile, Kuroka had already jumped off his head, transforming and joining her sister to make sure she was okay. It was Griselda who spoke up. Perhaps I should explain. She gave a quick glare to her charges, making them flinch. And thus began a long recap of the recent events that Flynn had missed during his investigation/killing spree. Apparently, some of the devils had decided to go after the Excalibur shards on their own, and somehow roped in Zenobia and Irina. They agreed to the plan so long as Griselda was not told, said woman, giving her disciples a terrifying smile that made them shiver in fear. In any case, the group began their plan the day after, moving about town to locate/draw out the enemy. Eventually, they did so in the evening, when they were attacked by a rogue exorcist named Freed, wielding one of the Excalibur shards. For some reason, the name sounded familiar to Flynn. But he shrugged it off. It was probably some foot soldier that the Slayer didn't bother to remember. Back to the story. The group was nearly overwhelmed until they finally managed to snag the guy, only for Freed to get loose and take Excalibur Mimic. That's when Griselda and Tiamat came in, saving the kids and chasing Freed away, followed by the rest of the devils appearing. And the reason you're all in my place is? Flynn asked, rather annoyed by this sudden development. He was now sitting on a chair, Tiamat standing beside him. It was Tiamat who spoke. I apologize, Master, but given the current situation, we needed a neutral and safe place to meet. It was my decision. Flynn looked at the dragon.
He could see the logic in that.
Given how both sides were semi-antagonist towards one another, a neutral ground was necessary to make sure they wouldn't do anything stupid. Not that Flynn liked that his house was said to be neutral ground, but he would trust Tiamat's logic. Can't say I'm happy, but at least I don't need to round them all up, Flynn said, much to Tiamat's relief. He glared at the young devils, and exorcists. They flinched at the stare, though Zenobia tried to hide it. And I'm even more pissed that you idiots decided to do something stupid and allow the enemy to not only learn that we were onto them, but also let them take a shard. Issei tried to defend himself and his friends. Hey, we were dash. I don't want to hear it. Flynn snapped, making the pervert shut his mouth. He looked back at Griselda and Tiamat. Were you two able to learn anything from your investigations? Wait, Rhea said, finally speaking for the first time since Flynn returned. Investigation? What are you talking about? It was Griselda who answered. Yesterday, I approached Mr. Blazkowicz and Lady Tiamat for their assistance in uncovering Kokobiel's possible location. We had just finished our last raid when we discovered these children in combat. What? Why was I not informed? Rias demanded, momentarily forgetting the major issue. The reason being was that we required discretion to locate the hideouts, Vega answered. Had multiple people been mobilized, it would have alerted our enemies and possibly hindered our efforts. Time was of the essence. In any case, we didn't have much luck in locating Kokobiel or his top subordinates.
Tiamat said.
With a snap of her fingers, she conjured a blue miniature holographic map of Kuo. Several spots were colored red. We managed to locate and eliminate several outposts where stray exorcists and low-ranked fallen angels were positioned. However, we found neither any clues as to where Kokobiel might be. Griselda took over as her students, and the devils were studying the map. Their faces were ones of shock, for Zenobia and Irina, because of all the things they missed when it was so obvious. And for the devils, more so that so many intruders had managed to infiltrate and hide out in the town they protected and lived in. It was a huge blow to Rias and Sona's pride, the governors of Kuo. It appears that Kokobiel communicated with these groups either through magic or his subordinates. We must assume that he has a small group of 4 to 6 winged fallen angels under his direct command, along with Valper and Fried. And we would have been able to remain undetected if you lot hadn't screwed things up. Flynn said, harshly. Hey, what did we do? Issei exclaimed, flinching when Flynn sent him a deadly glare. I believe Blazkowicz is referring to how your attempts to bait the enemy has only made them aware of our actions. No doubt Kokobiel will now realize his other forces have been eliminated, Vega explained. He will most likely alter his strategy, which could prove disadvantageous for us if he wishes to accelerate his plan. Issei and the others who were involved in his whole plan had no defense. Vega's words made them realize how foolish their idea was and how it might cost them, especially since the enemy had gotten their hands on another shard. Their ashamed expressions were ignored as Griselda asked Flynn, "Does this mean you learned what their plans are?" "We have a rough guess from the fallen angels we interrogated," Flynn said. "Kokobiel is obviously here to kill Gremory and Citri. From what we learned, though, was that they planned to blow up the entire town to do so. That got everyone's attention. Destroy the whole town. Why would they do that?" Saji asked in disbelief. It was Tiamat who answered. "I've seen people like Kokobiel before. For their wishes, they are willing to do anything to obtain it, no matter the sacrifice. His destroying the town to reignite the Great War is not too far-fetched. In fact, it would worsen the situation as it could possibly draw in the Shinto pantheon." The realization of the possible consequences seemed to have finally sunk into the devils and the 2 younger exorcists. The outcome of their layback and/or impatient attitude was finally rearing its ugly head. The only one who did not seem to be considering their actions was Kiba, who was still cross for allowing Excalibur to escape. Flynn had to snort at the kid's vengeful obsession towards a bunch of inanimate objects. "Seeing how we're now sitting on a possible powder keg, it would be probably smart if we stuck in groups. The devils will stay together, same as the exorcists. If either group is attacked, contact me or Tiamat immediately," Flynn said. "Hold on. Who made you leader?" Zenobia demanded, her arrogant and dismissive attitude towards anyone outside the church coming back, but quickly disappeared as Flynn set another glare that promised pain if she started anything. "I did. Because you brats can't seem to do anything without making a bigger mess." He then took the time to look at Excalibur Destruction, which was resting against the couch Zenobia was sitting on. He had to admit it was an impressive, if rather odd-looking blade, given that its grip was long enough to be held by 3 hands, with an axe-like guard and the tip splitting into 3 points. Not as impressive as Sentinel swords or his crucible, but Flynn could see himself using it. But there was something else that bothered Flynn. The aura it gave off was familiar to him. It was distorted, but it definitely felt familiar to the Doomslayer. And the name itself was also nagging the back of his mind. Before he knew it, more suppressed memories suddenly resurfaced. Please make me your disciple. Do you know what we're fighting? I will kill them all. A survivor from that clan. You got a name? For you. What's it called? Young man, where are you going? It was Griselda's voice who brought Flynn back to the present. Blinking rapidly, the Slayer realized only a second had passed by during that broken, but brief, flashback. He had been having more and more suppressed memories resurfacing ever since he woke up on Mars. In any case, he turned his head and focused on Griselda, who was looking at Kiba. Said boy was making his way towards the front door. There was a look on his face that Flynn recognized. One that showed rage, hatred, and a thirst for vengeance. Feelings that Flynn knew all too well, having drowned in them for eons. Kiba didn't even look at her when he responded.
Out.
I've rested enough. Kiba, what the hell, man? Issei exclaimed. Rias spoke next. Yudo, I know why you wish to leave, but as your king, I cannot permit you to do that. I can no longer excuse this behavior. This time Kiba did turn and looked at his king. Forgive me, Bucho, but I simply can't stand around anymore. And where will you go? Tiamat asked rhetorically. She was standing beside Flynn. You have no idea where their base of operation is. What's more, they'll know you're after them. You may as well walk around the town's outskirts than trying to find them. You'll only exhaust yourself in such a fruitless endeavor. That made the blonde knight glare at her, but the dragon showed no reaction to that. Instead, Flynn spoke next.
Tiamat is right.
I personally don't care if you get yourself killed, but even I find this pitiful. Especially since you're so fixated on pieces of scrap. That was the final straw for Kiba. The knight summoned a demonic sword and pointed it at the Slayer, causing the others to look on in surprise. Tiamat looked like she was going to attack the boy threatening her master, but Flynn seemed unbothered. Don't you dare belittle me, Kiba shouted, all restraints now gone. You have no idea what I've been through because of those shards. The people I've lost, the pain I endured. What could you know about my hatred? My desire for vengeance? You know absolutely nothing about such things. Snap.
Fwoosh.
Several things happened in 0.05 seconds. The first was the sudden pressure that enveloped the room. At the same time, Tiamat immediately grabbed Kiba by the back of his shirt. She then followed that by grabbing Kuroka, the devils, and the exorcists and bringing them around her. Following that, she cast a teleportation circle and in the remaining 0.02 seconds, they had reappeared outside the old club building. Tiamat let go of Kiba, who had become paled-faced and was sweating heavily, his legs having no strength as got on his hands and knees. The other devils and 2 young exorcists were in similar conditions. Asia, Irina, Issei, Saji, and Ruruko, on the other hand, instantly threw up, gasping for air, as they tried to remember how to breathe. Griselda and Kuroka were a bit better, though even they were not completely unaffected, their eyes wide and pupils dilated. The reason for their behaviors was none other than the killing intent released by Flynn. What? Rias gasped, shaking. What was that? That was Master's anger. Tiamat answered. If I had been a second slower, all of you, or at least your knight, would have been torn to pieces. She looked at said knight with disapproval. Let me just say this, boy. There is no one in existence who knows hatred and anger as my master does. It would seem so, Griselda commented, helping her disciples as they shuddered. In any case, we are still in the same situation. The enemy knows we are on to them, and they have another shard. I would push for us to come up with a plan, but given everyone's current condition, that would be unwise. Tiamat nodded. It would also be best for her master to have some time to himself. For now, stay together in groups. Make sure the less disciplined ones have someone to watch over them. She gave another look at Kiba and Zenobia. The dragon glanced at Kuroka, who was hugging a still shaken Kaneko. You should stay with your sister for the time being. I'll return to Master when he's calmed down. Back with Flynn. The Doomslayer was leaning forward, his arms resting on his knees while clenching his hands together and tapping his forehead against them. Count to 4. Inhale. Count to 4. Exhales, Flynn mentally chanted as he did said exercise. It was an old calming ritual that had been in the Blazkowicz family since William Joseph Blazkowicz I. The Slayer had been using said method before and after his crusade with Hell. It was one of the few things he remembered from his old life, and he needed it now. When that blonde kid had said those words, how Flynn knows nothing about hatred or vengeance, he had been ready to rip his head off. It was only Tiamat's quick thinking that saved the kid's life, and the others too. And if he knew her as well as he did, Tiamat would give him some space until he was calm enough. For now, it was just Flynn and Vega. Are you all right, Flynn?
Said AI asked.
Whenever Vega said his name instead of his title, Flynn knew that he was worried. I'm fine, Flynn grunted, leaning back into his chair. His fists were still clenched despite his words, though. Vega did not seem fully convinced, but did not pry any further. Instead, he changed the subject. I hope you do not mind, but I detected your pulse quickening when you noticed the Excalibur shard. Is there a history between you and it? Flynn rolled his eyes. Of course, he would notice his reaction to the sword, even if no one else did. You could say that, though not in its current form. I actually know its origins, and that of its first wielder.
Oh,
Vega asked, intrigued. Her name was Artoria, Flynn began. She hailed from the Ilfin clan, a clan known for their swordsmanship. They resided in the eastern mountains of Argent Nur when the demons arrived. The clan was nearly wiped out when Telorum fell along with the Alorum clan. The survivors eventually arrived at Exultia after Terra's Nabad was abandoned, and there she heard of my exploits. She practically came begging me to train her. I imagine that was a surprise for you, the artificial intelligence commented. Flynn snorted. At the time, most people were too awestruck to approach, saved for a few. So, yeah, I was surprised when a girl around 8 ran up to me and asked to be my student. He gave a small smile, recalling the defiant little girl with her messy blonde hair and blue eyes that seemed to glow with determination. I eventually relented and trained her alongside Commander Valen. And she was quite a prodigy, too. When she eventually joined the front lines a few years later, she was able to kill barons with little trouble.
He sighed.
I guess she had a bigger impact on me than I thought, because with King Novik's blessing, I was permitted to forge a sword for her, which I named Khalidvolch, which was eventually renamed into Excalibur, Vega added. Flynn shrugged, assuming that was the case. Did you also give it those powers? Flynn shook his head. When I forged the blade, I made it so that its sharpness and durability would be increased by the wielder's willpower. I recall seeing her sending multiple imps flying with a single swing of the sword. Artoria even said everything around her looked like they were moving slow. Vega let out what sounded like a hum. And did she? No, Flynn said, knowing what Vega was asking about. She did not join in the final push against the demons. She remained behind because she had to take care of her son, Artur, who was only 2 at the time. We couldn't risk losing any Argenta women who could give birth, were pregnant, or had children. Honestly, I had thought she had been killed, but if this is the same sword, then I'm guessing she survived and her family ended up here somehow, becoming the Pendragon family. It made the Slayer think of what else he missed after he stayed in Hell, followed by his imprisonment. He knew that Argent Nur and the Argentas were still around, now under the Maker's thrall, but what else? Were there survivors in their colony worlds? Had they also submitted to a corrupt rule? Or were there some who were resisting? What of Command Valen, the betrayer? Where was he in all this?
What happened to the royal family?
Were there loyalist survivors still on the planet? To be honest, these were questions Flynn never really had. His desire to eradicate all demonkind had always been at the front of his mind. But with his current situation, forced to sit back and relax instead of being constantly on the hunt, It made Flynn think more. He didn't like it if he was being honest. Well, getting back on track, Flynn said, hoping to get rid of such thoughts by working. Have you been able to pinpoint Cocobeel's base of operations, Vega? No, unfortunately. Even though we have collected a quantitative amount of information, I have not been able to locate his primary base, Vega answered. Cocobeel would not share it with the lower-rank subordinates, it would seem. He most likely contacted them via magic or had trusted underlings relay messages to the other bases. Flynn blinked, noting a tone in the AI's voice. Are you annoyed? He asked because Vega did indeed sound aggravated. No, Vega replied plainly. The Slayer snorted. Vega was an advanced artificial intelligence that required a shitload of power to remain functional at 100% and made for running operations that dealt with esoteric forces. And even here, Vega had managed to hack into any supernatural technology that they had run into, from the devils to the yokai. He was even able to gain access to the phones that /dog used, allowing him access to the Grigori database. So, the fact he could not locate a simple base must have been annoying for him. Looks like old-fashioned styles were still useful. Guess for now we'll just have to wait, Flynn said. A first for him. He always preferred going after his prey. The exorcists. The three church agents were walking down one of the town's parks as they made their way back to the hotel. A full moon shined brightly on Koho Town, illuminating the areas not lit by street lamps. It was easy to see Griselda and her two charges head back. While she may have seemed composed, her senses were sharp, and her eyes were periodically looking about for signs of attack. Zenobia and Irina were less aware of their surroundings, especially the former was deep in thought. Her gaze would wander to her foster mother, followed by looking in the direction of Flynn's house, something that did not go unnoticed by Griselda. You should not be concerned with such thoughts, Zenobia, Griselda advised. That kind of thinking is dangerous. Zenobia was startled.
Ah.
Sister Griselda, please forgive me. It's just... Here she paused. Just who is Flynn Blazkowicz? The exorcist asked in half wonder and half fear. Griselda sighed. It was clear that little experience was still bothering her. And Irina by the looks of it. That I cannot say for sure. I must admit, when Lord Michael first told us to be cautious around him, I did not fully understand. But when I first gazed upon him, I saw something beyond his appearance. Something older, powerful, and filled with such hate and rage it made everything else seem tamed in comparison. I won't lie and say it struck me with a bit of apprehension, but for that brief moment I felt his bloodlust. I truly understood Lord Michael's warning. Flynn Blazkowicz is more than he appears, and not someone to be underestimated. She paused as she saw her charges taking in that. Though I cannot help but wonder what he went through to gain such strength. I can only guess what horrors and terrors he experienced, and what our enemies might be planning if they learn of him. You think Cocobeel might target Blazkowicz? Irina asked. Griselda nodded. Most likely. While Tiamat and I did some damage to his forces during our investigation, it was Blazkowicz who inflicted the most, especially having slaughtered numerous stray exorcists and fallen angels. There is no way the cadre is unaware of our actions, especially with what you two and those devils did. She gave a glare to the younger girls, making them shrink at being reprimanded again. For the time being, we should return to our hotel and be on alert for any possible attacks. Her words were cut off as she felt a powerful presence nearby. Without a word, Griselda Excalibur blessing, startling both Zenobia and Irina, the two fumbling a bit as they tried to get their own weapons ready. The senior exorcist was just able to turn around and shield her chargers when something came upon them. The last things she saw were black feathers. At the Grigori, Mephisto sighed as he sat in a large meeting room in the Grigori's headquarters. The demon was humming a nonsensical tune as he leaned back against his chair. The guards outside could hear him, and Mephisto could tell that they were getting unnerved by his nonchalant attitude. Honestly, he was not all that surprised that Azazel had asked to meet with him. Mephisto had a pretty good idea the reason for it was. Eventually, the Governor-General entered the room, with a neutral look on his face. It gave nothing away, and yet Mephisto could feel the tension underneath it. It's about time, Azazel. I was beginning to think that my invitation here was nothing more than a practical joke. Azazel chuckled drily. I'm sure you would. Heck, Shem would have my head if I did treat this as a joke, he said as he sat across from the demon. The Governor-General's face turned serious, a rare thing to happen, which meant that Azazel was in no joking mood. Let's get straight to the point. I know that Flynn Blazkowicz's kid is the Doomslayer, as does Michael, and I'm going to assume that the Devil's leaders are now aware. Which leads me to my question. Are they coming? Mephisto frowned. Azazel was indeed taking this seriously, and it was no surprise either. The evidence so far insists they are. The appearance of the demons, including these Reavers, in Kyoto is proof enough. I had suspicions they might reach out to the old Satan faction, but I honestly hoped that it wouldn't happen. The fallen angel cursed, clenching his fists. We're not ready for hell. Forget the three factions as a whole. Individually, we're a fucking mess. The angels cannot reproduce as they normally could when God was alive. The devils are neck-deep in political conflicts that I wouldn't be surprised if a second civil war broke out. And don't get me started on the problems in the Grigori. Speak of which, what are you doing about Kokobiels? Mephisto asked curiously. Not surprised you've heard about that, Azazel said with a sigh. I've got one of my own ready to apprehend him, and from what I've heard, the devils and church are already aware of him being Kuo, though I have a feeling the Slayer's going to be the one who deals with that headache. I almost feel sorry for Kokobiel, Mephisto said with a snort. Then he turned serious. However, this little trouble might be useful. You could use it as an opportunity to call a summit with Michael and Surzex. With that, we can form a united front against the demons when they show up. Only problem is, will the Slayer play along? Azazel finished. All the stories he'd heard, the memories that came pouring in, all pointed to the fact that would not be happening. That might be difficult. Any chance you might be able to convince him? Mephisto laughed at that, as if it were a joke. Please, getting the devils to stop using the evil pieces would be easier than having the Slayer follow along. He's a wild card, believe me. Mephisto mused, recalling the many times the Slayer went off to do his own thing. It was probably only thanks to that AI that Flynn was behaving for the time being. No, our only option is to point him in the right direction and hope we don't get caught in the crossfire. Not happy with that, but Azazel couldn't really argue with Mephisto's assessment. For millennia, this Earth had been freed of Hell's gaze, and yet now they were finally moving on them. And it was at a bad time when, as Azazel stated before, the three factions were not at their strongest. Especially if the old Satan faction were working with Hell, because then who knows how many devils would follow. All we can hope is that Kokobiel will be dealt with and nothing bad happens, Azazel prayed. He would later punch himself in the face after he hears what happened the next day in Kuo. Eons ago, Flynn was sitting on a porch, wearing a plain green shirt and brown pants, showing his muscular frame. His brown hair was short and combed, and his blue eyes were locked on the sole figure playing in the field in front of him. A child no older than 8 was playing in the grass with the toys his father had made. Flynn's son, Stan, looked as if he imagined himself as a big spaceman as he was holding a toy spaceship and pretended it was flying. The perfect picture of innocence, and for a moment, the ex-Marine almost imagined a certain brown rabbit hopping by. In the background was the city of Terra's Nabad, the capital city of Argent Nur, his new home. You seemed trouble, a new voice said. Approaching Flynn from behind was a woman around the same age as him. She had long blonde hair, fair skin, and brown eyes that shined with kindness and compassion. She wore simple attire, a plain white dress with the emblem of the Temple of the Wraiths, the sect of the Deeg order that still worshipped the elemental wraiths, sewn onto it in golden silk. On her feet were plain old khaki sandals. Despite her simple wares, she was the most beautiful woman in Flynn's eyes. It's nothing, Isabel, Flynn said to his wife, going back to looking at their son, Stan Blazkowicz. As a descendant of the Bethian clan, like Flynn and his mother before him, the courts of Argent Nur had wished for the child to take on the clan's name. However, Flynn was adamant that his father's name be preserved, just as his mother had wished. Isabel also backed this, and King Novik agreed to honor his request. His wife's smaller hand laid upon his larger one. "That's a lie, and we both know that," Isabel said firmly as she sat beside Flynn. "Now tell me, what's wrong?" Flynn looked at her, finding it hard to keep silent at his wife's gaze. Sighing, he looked back at Stan as he responded. "Seeing all this, Stan, it almost makes me forget what happened. And yet, I can't forget. Almost like I don't want to. They're going to come here. I just know it." Isabel frowned. She knew that Flynn was talking about the demons, the same entities that had invaded his world, Earth. And despite all he did, his world and its people were still lost, leaving Flynn as the only survivor. Even though he had recovered from his mental damage after fighting in hell for so long, the pain was still there, the pain of fear. Fear that the demons would return, that they would come for this world, to claim its resources, souls, and power for their own. Isabel put her smaller hands on her husband's larger ones, getting Flynn's attention. The priestess gave him a comforting look. "I know the pain is still there, Flynn, and that it will not truly go away. But never forget that I am here for you. Remember that you have a new life here now with me and our son. And King Novik and the council are aware of this threat. Should they come, we will be ready, and we will face it together. The firstborn have protected this world since the beginning, and with them with us, we shall stop any force that seeks to destroy us." Flynn looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes with his blue-green ones. Isabel meant every word she said, and part of Flynn believed her. And he decided to accept that part, especially as their son called out to him, wanting to play with his father. With a sigh, Flynn got up and walked towards Stan, a small smile forming on his face as his son laughed. Present. The Slayer did not sleep, not requiring it after receiving the blessing of the divinity machine. And he was grateful for it, but now with nothing but time on his hands, old memories of the past began to creep back. He still remembered that day, the last time he felt the growing fear of Hell's return and the reassurance of Isabel, High Deeg of the Wraith Covenant. The same woman who found him outside the walls of Sentinel Prime, nursed him back to health, and eventually became his wife and bore his son Stan. It would be 2 years later when that promise was tested and the forces of Hell besieged the Sentinel Empire. When only half a year afterwards half of that promise was broken when his family was killed by the demons again, and Flynn forsook mortality and accepted the Seraphim's blessing for power to gain his vengeance against the demons. Flynn always spent his time pushing thoughts like this to the back of his mind. He didn't like to think about his past, as he was no longer the man he used to be. That man died when the demons invaded. That man died with the rest of his loved ones. All that was left was the Doomslayer, a living embodiment of wrath and death. Flynn thus decided to go outside and shake his mind off such thoughts. Moving about always seemed to work. He spent the whole day patrolling Koho. He had been wandering around the town for some time, as he felt no exhaustion or hunger. The walk also helped him cool himself off after last night's little episode too. Flynn was used to being consumed by anger, but ever since his training with the Night Sentinels, he had learned how to temper that rage. He mentally kicked himself for forgetting his training. He was heading back to his house, the sun beginning to set, when he suddenly got a magic call from Tiamat. "Tiamat?" Flynn asked, moving into a nearby alleyway. "Forgive me, Master, but you should know that I found the 2 young exorcists. They're unconscious and wounded, and the remaining Excalibur shards are missing."
"Damn it."
Flynn cursed. "Wait, where's the 3rd one? Griselda's?"
"I didn't see her, Master."
"But I have her scent, and that of a fallen angel. There's a trail of blood here, too." It only took a second for Flynn to figure out what happened. The remaining fallen angels ambushed the exorcists, took the shards, and for some reason Griselda too. Zenobia and Irina were obviously left behind to die after the theft was completed, and the reason Griselda was taken was for the enemy to have a hostage as shield. "Set up a marker so I can get there. Vega can scan the holy energy and blood. He and I will track them down and retrieve the shards and rescue the nun. Take the girls to the devils. Might as well have them be useful," he ordered as he moved quicker. "Understood. I'll let you know what happens." Tiamat hung up. Flynn immediately made his way back to his house. Not wasting a moment, he opened the garage door, revealing his motorcycle. Since he began getting money, one of Flynn's projects was upgrading his motorcycle. Currently, it was in a prototype phase but was still impressive. Still a chopper motorcycle, it was larger than before, with the wheels designed just like those of off-road motorcycles. The entire bike itself had also been reinforced with armor plating, with a pair of machine guns mounted on the sides near the handlebar. It was far from complete, but Flynn was sure it would be enough for now. Manifesting his Predator suit, the Slayer mounted his bike and activated the ride's built-in portal, said gate appearing in front of him. With a roar of the engines, Flynn took off into the portal. He instantly reappeared in a clearing on the outskirts of town. Tiamat had already left to bring the girls to the Devils. Thus, all that was left were the remnants of the fight that took place. There were several small craters and scorch marks, along with a few broken trees and puddles of blood. Whoever had attacked them sure went hard on the exorcists. Vega? Scans indicate that the exorcists had been ambushed elsewhere. Griselda must have led their pursers to this location to avoid civilian causalities, Vega explained. I have detected traces of blood and holy energy leading away from the area. Blood type matches Griselda's. Holy energy belongs to unknown individual. Put on my HUD. We're following it, Flynn ordered. Seconds later, a map appeared on the side of his visor, showing the route to take. Flooring the engine, the Slayer took off. As he drove, a sense of joy filled Flynn's heart, for he would once more spill blood of his enemies. Later, it was night by the time he saw the location. It was a large warehouse near the edge of the town. Obviously abandoned given its sorry state, and yet it was clearly in good enough condition to be used as a hideout. Vega, what's the status? I am detecting familiar life signs inside, along with 5 fallen angels. There is a barrier around the warehouse, meant to obscure its presence and set off an alarm if anyone uninvited passes it. It will not impede us from entering. A malicious smile formed on Flynn's face as he kicked the chopper into high gear. He had no care if an alarm went off. The enemy would be dead soon anyway. Driving towards a small cliff edge a couple of feet away from the warehouse, the chopper flew into the air before crashing into the window. Time slowed down as the Slayer took in his surroundings. Sure enough, there were 5 fallen angels, 3 floating in the air, and the last 2 around a woman tied to a chair by spell-amplified chains. Said woman was Griselda, a bit beaten up and her habit off, but still alive if the scanner on Predator's suit was any indication. Flynn pressed the extra buttons on the handlebars. The heavy machine guns opened fire, killing one of the fallen angels, while another one was forced to crash after one of his wings was torn to shreds. A third fallen angel was hit head-on by the chopper's front wheel, reduced to paste upon impact with the ground. The last 2 were able to reach, conjuring light spears and throwing them at the Slayer. Gripping the handlebars, Flynn swerved the bike and avoided the explosive projectiles, while pulling out his rocket launcher. The lock-on mod attached, Flynn took aim at the close's fallen angel. Once he was in sight, Flynn fired 3 consecutive rockets. The fallen angel didn't have time to conjure a barrier before his body was reduced to bits and gore. Swapping it with his combat shotgun, Flynn fired a grenade at the last fallen angel. That fallen managed to avoid the attack, but left him open to the Slayer, who jumped off his bike and grabbed the fallen angel by the ankles. With a strong pull, Flynn slammed the fallen one on the solid pavement, creating cracks in the ground and making the fallen angel cough up blood. Flynn finished him off with a powerful punch through the chest. With the guards dead, Flynn made his way over to Griselda. The nun was unconscious, but otherwise seemed unharmed saved for a few scratches. Acting quickly, Flynn gripped the magical chains, not minding the bolts of energy from it, and ripped it off the exorcist. Vega, what's her condition? Her vitals are normal. And though she suffers from a coma, she should recover, Vega replied before suddenly pausing. I am detecting multiple fallen angel signatures approaching, along with a large number of humans, stray exorcists no doubt, approaching our position. That made sense, Flynn thought. They were probably setting this place up as a trap for whoever was killing their friends, while at the same time dividing the enemy forces. As the glow from the fallen angel's spear shined from outside, Flynn merely grinned as he pumped his shotgun. Whether it was for him or someone else, possibly Tiamat, Flynn was not sure. Not that it mattered in the first place. After all, he wasn't the one trapped. They were all trapped with him. Kuo Academy, nighttime. By the time Tiamat arrived at the school, a barrier had already been put up. From the magic signature, she could tell that it was the Citri girl's work. And her senses could pick up her peerage, the Gremory peerage, the cat, and one of the exorcist girls inside. Tiamat also detected several other individuals, one of whom had the scent of fallen holy power, stronger than the other fallen angels she had dealt with earlier. Without breaking the barrier, Tiamat entered the school grounds, using his draconic wings to hover above the battlefield and take stock. She could see the alliance of devils and exorcists fighting against clones of Cerberus. They were proving a bit tough for them, but with Kuroka lending assistance, they were slowly overcoming the hellhounds. She noticed that the Gremory Knight and Exorcist, both wielding new swords, were fighting against that rogue exorcist who was also wielding a new sword, one that radiated corrupted holy power. "What's this?" A voice shifted Tiamat's attention. I had wondered who it was that was disrupting my operations, but to think it was the Chaos Karma Dragon. This is quite a surprise. Sitting on top of a floating throne was none other than Kokobile. Dressed in the typical dark-colored clothing of all fallen angels, he had pale skin and pointy ears that would have made one think he was a vampire. "I'm surprised that you hadn't figured it out. I've been in this town for a while," Tiamat replied as she flew up until she was facing Kokobile directly. "Looks like you need a bit of work on your skills if you couldn't even detect my presence." The cadre merely laughed off her jab. "Yes, well, I supposed I was to focus on my work to really check. Still, this is a nice surprise. I was going to test the Gremory and Citri princess along with their queens, but fighting the strongest Dragon King seems like the better choice before war starts." With that, Kokobile stood from his throne. 10 black, feathery wings suddenly extended from his back, the force destroying the throne, with him now levitating in the air. Kokobile then manifested a light spear and launched it at Tiamat. If it were any of the children, the projectile would have been too fast to see. But for Tiamat, she easily dodged it before responding in kind with a barrage of blue fireballs at the cadre. Kokobile merely conjured a magic circle and deflected the attacks, though he did stagger back a bit. Not wasting time, Tiamat launched herself towards Kokobile, cloaking both her fists in blue flames. Kokobile just barely had enough time to conjure 2 smaller shields to block the relentless blows that Tiamat soon unleashed upon him. The impact from each punch was enough to create shockwaves that caught everyone else's attention. Tiamat paid them no mind as she continued her assault before changing tactics and delivering a kick to Kokobile's left side. The strike sent Kokobile flying through the air. The cadre managed to stop himself, not losing his grin at the thrilling battle he was experiencing. Summoning a light sword in each hand, he launched himself towards Tiamat. The two were once again taking the fight up close. Tiamat's flame-infused fists clashed with Kokobile's swords, the air around them kicking up from the powerful force of their swings. Eventually, Kokobile managed to get a blade past Tiamat's defenses. The light blade struck her right shoulder, singeing it. Thanks to her scales, the wound was not deep, but there was still a gash with a bit of red showing. Tiamat held back the urge to wince, and instead performed an uppercut in response. Kokobile just barely managed to avoid the blow to his chin, flinching as he felt the heat from the blue flames. Flying backwards, Kokobile summoned multiple light spears the size of javelins. As if fired from cannons, they shot towards Tiamat at breakneck speed. Undeterred, Tiamat reared her head back, taking a deep breath. Then she shot her head forward, opening her mouth and releasing her dragon breath. A wide stream of blue flames came out of her mouth towards the oncoming light spears. The flames immediately consumed them and continued onwards towards Kokobile.
"Shit."
Kokobile cursed as he covered his body with his wings. At the same time, he conjured another magic circle as a shield just as the flames consumed him. Tiamat stopped her attack as she watched the flames continue to burn, eyes scanning for any signs of Kokobile. It came when the flames were suddenly dispersed, revealing Kokobeel, wings spread out. He was covered in several small burns, singed areas on his clothes, but otherwise was unharmed. In fact, Kokobeel seemed rather happy. Haha. Now, this is a fight. It's been so long since I faced someone such as yourself, Tiamat, he exclaimed, his grin widening.
Tiamat scoffed.
Please, you won't be saying such things once my master arrives. Kokobeel raised a brow. Your master? I was not aware that the Chaos Karma Dragon had become someone's familiar. That would explain why I lost more people than when it was just you and that exorcist. Am I to assume that they have also gone to save said exorcist? You're correct, Tiamat answered plainly. The cadre chuckled. Then I'm afraid to say that they won't be coming. I left some of my strongest and best warriors there. No doubt they have already defeated your master, and will bring them here, or what's left of them. Kokobeel frowned when Tiamat started laughing. Oh, you know nothing, Kokobeel, Tiamat said through her laughter. Once he gets here, you will be filled with rightful fear. As if on cue, her enhanced hearing picked up the sound of an engine getting closer. And it seems that time is now. Before Kokobeel could speak, his mouth shut closed as he felt a powerful presence engulfing the entire area. It was at a level that only someone of great instinct and experience could feel it, and it was doubtful that his two followers and the young devils and exorcist would feel it. But Kokobeel could, and for some reason the presence felt ancient, impossibly so, and familiar too. It struck something in Kokobeel, stirring up long-lost memories and a feeling he had not felt in a long time. The feeling of fear. Down below, Zenobia and the Gremory and Citri groups had managed to put down the last Cerberus, thanks to Kuroka, when they too finally heard a vehicle approaching. As if coming from the sky, a motorcycle came diving through the barrier and landing on the ground. It bounced a little but remained standing as its driver put it to a halt. The driver's armor was a bit messy, covered in blood, but otherwise was fine. And sitting behind him, arms wrapped around his waist, was a bruised and exhausted, but still very much alive Griselda Quartra. Griselda? Zenobia exclaimed, having just blocked one of Freed's strikes with Durandal. Even now, the sight of the legendary Holy Sword had shocked both sides, especially since Zenobia revealed that she was a natural holy wielder. Right now, though, the girl looked relieved to see her guardian alive and well. She looked apprehensive when her gaze shifted towards the armored man. Who are you? For she and the others could feel the overwhelming, if not somewhat familiar, presence that man radiated. It put them all on edge. Enough, Zenobia, Griselda said as she got off. She had a light sword in her hand, taking from one of the stray exorcists that Flynn had killed. This is Sir Blascus's. He saved me from my captors. Wait, that's Blascus's? Rias asked, having never seen the armor before. The only one who was not surprised was Tiamat, so that only confirmed Griselda's words. Flynn had ignored them, focused on important things. The Slayer was busy scanning his surroundings, taking in the battlefield. The fighting had temporarily paused with their arrival, as most eyes were on them. He looked up to see Kokobeel and Tiamat still in the air. The latter was happy as usual to see her master, while the former, what could only be described as shock changing to pure horror, appeared on his face. The usual arrogance and battle lust that Kokobeel gave off was gone in the face of the Hellwalker. It can't be, he muttered, hoping this was some kind of bad dream. But it was obvious it was not. Instead, it was nothing short of a nightmare made real. How are you here, Lord Kokobeel? Valper asked. The rogue priest had been hiding behind a barrier a safe distance from the fighting. Like himself, the others who were unaware of the cause of Kokobeel's scream looked up at the cadre in confusion. How is this possible? You were sealed away, sealed in the darkest depths of hell, never to be freed. How is it you stand here now? Kokobeel exclaimed, looking at Flynn, who remained silent. Answer me, Doomslayer. Doomslayer? Rias repeated the words. For some reason the title sent a shiver up her spine, instincts long buried resurfacing. The other devils also felt the same sensation, as if death's hand was resting on their shoulders. Flynn said nothing. He merely glared at the cadre through his helmet, pulling out his super shotgun and loading a pair of new shells. That act made Kokobeel flinch. Only one person seemed oblivious to the tension in the air. "Hey, shithead." All eyes went to Freed, who was pointing the fused Excalibur at Flynn. The stray exorcist looked at him with an expression that was a mix of insanity and anger. "Remember me? I still need to repay you for what you did to my arms, asshole. I'm gonna enjoy carving you up with my dash." "Who the fuck are you?" Flynn asked, giving him a bored look. From the sound of his voice, the Doomslayer had honestly forgotten Freed. That seemed to have removed any restraint on the mad exorcist. "Motherfucker," he roared as he gripped his sword with both hands. He took off at lightning speed, channeling the power of Excalibur rapidly as he charged towards Flynn.
No.
"Stop, you fool," Kokobeel ordered. But it was too late. Freed had already lunged at Flynn, ready to bring his new sword down on him. Unfortunately, he had once again underestimated his opponent. Without even looking, the Doomslayer raised his fist and punched the sword, blowing the fused Excalibur into pieces, to the shock of everyone present, except for Tiamat. "What?" That was Freed's last word as Flynn immediately grabbed him by the neck with one hand. Freed tried to shoot at Flynn with his gun arms, but the Slayer responded by tearing off the left arm. He then threw Freed to the ground with a hard thud, before striking the stray exorcist in the face with the torn limb. The force was enough that Freed's head was crushed like a watermelon. The devils and exorcists were gaping at what they just witnessed, not so much the brutality Flynn displayed, but the ease of how he dispatched Freed. Sure, the guy was insane, but he was skilled, and his insanity only helped with his unpredictable fighting style, enough that it put both Kiba and Zenobia on their toes. Combined with the fact that he wielded a fused Excalibur that had the powers of 6 of the 7 shards, Freed was formidable. And yet Flynn killed him before the stray priest had even a chance to use a single power of the sword. Valper looked like he was going to have a panic attack, unaware of the red glow in his pocket. Flynn did not waste time. Less than a second after killing Freed, he shifted his attention towards Kokobeel. Whipping out his Gauss cannon, the Slayer took aim and fired at the cadre. The fallen angel was still in a state of panic when he realized that Flynn's next target was on him. He tried to conjure a barrier, but the high-speed projectile, empowered by Argent energy, broke through the barrier with ease. The only pro was that the barrier stopped the shot from tearing through Kokobeel's body, though the shockwave from the impact still sent the cadre crashing into the ground. Before Kokobeel hit the ground, Flynn dashed towards him, bringing out his combat shotgun. Bringing out the explosive mod, firing an explosive shot at Kokobeel. The fallen angel had no time to respond as the shot hit him in the back, sending him crashing into the ground. Flynn followed it up with a kick that sent Kokobeel flying into the air. Kokobeel managed to recover, trying to gain some distance. But it was all for naught as the Slayer used his jump boots to push himself higher into the air, grabbing onto Kokobeel's ankle. With a single motion, Flynn threw Kokobeel downwards, slamming the cadre into the ground hard. Flynn landed with a soft thud second later and once again lunged at Kokobeel. This time the fallen angel was trying to fight back. Conjuring a light sword in each hand, he swung them at the Doomslayer. Flynn responded by raising his armored fists, the Praetor suit easily deflecting the blades made of holy light. He swatted the blade on his right before delivering a devastating punch to Kokobeel's chest with his left fist. The sound of bones breaking could be heard across the courtyard. The fallen angel coughed out blood and nearly lost his footing, yet impressively remained standing, albeit barely, as he kept trying to wound the Doomslayer. Once again, the devils and exorcists were in a state of disbelief. They all knew that Flynn was formidable, having either witnessed it themselves or through collected information. He had defeated Riser and his peerage with ease and managed to deliver a strong blow to Surzek's Lucifer. And yet they had tried to find reason for such events. Riser, while strong, was hardly a threat compared to the dozens of other strong devils and those outside the race. And as for Surzek's, the Satan had been trying to end things peacefully and must have been taken by surprise. And yet such excuses went out the window from what they were witnessing. Kokobeel, a fallen angel cadre, a veteran of the Great War, was being overwhelmed. The same fallen angel who had defeated Griselda, Zenobia, and Irina with ease, easily countered a combined attack from Rias and Aquino after their powers had been boosted by Issei, and even fought evenly against Tiamat. The same Kokobeel was now being demolished by a human. So absorbed by the spectacle that none of them noticed Valper apparently having a spasm, clutching both his heart and something in his pocket. Back with Flynn, the Doomslayer decided to end things. Deflecting another light blade, Flynn grabbed the arm and promptly tore it off. He followed this by drawing out his super shotgun and blowing off Kokobeel's left leg. The cadre could only howl in pain before Flynn grabbed him by the neck, holding him in place. Kokobeel struggled against the grip, scratching and hitting the arm with his remaining hand, all the while ignoring his bleeding. He looked at Flynn with a glare of hatred and fear. "Why?" he roared, blood pouring from his mouth. "Why are you protecting them? These devils. They are your true enemy, your prey, spawns of the slaves of doom. Those whom you hate the most. Why are you protecting them?" Flynn merely glared at Kokobeel behind his visor. "I'm not protecting them. I'm protecting the humans of this town." He tightened his grip, digging his fingers into Kokobeel's throat. "And as for why they're not dead, yet I don't need to tell a dead man that." With that, Flynn ripped off Kokobeel's head, spine attached. Blood came gushing out of the stump like a geyser. The Slayer paid it no mind as he dropped the corpse and then tossed the head aside. Flynn prepared to deal with the last remaining obstacle when suddenly, "Warning! Argent energy detected," Vega exclaimed. "Master." Tiamat's voice came after. The last noise was the familiar roar of a demon. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. Remember to like, subscribe, and support the channel. Remember to also support the author. See you next week.